Hello guys, good morning. Welcome to another recap. I'm here with the Game 3 recap from the action that we just saw today between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Magnus Carlsen. Now, Jan had the white pieces again, and I think everyone was wondering, first of all, are we going to see e4 again? Second of all, is Magnus going to react the exact same way? Because usually once you see both players get each color in a match, the most important question is, once someone gets the same color again, are they going to repeat the exact same thing? Is the other player going to deviate? So I think today's match was pretty important because it would give us an insight as to what Jan was thinking in terms of match strategy. Does he want to play the exact same position that he had in game one? Did he even like that position? And same question for Magnus. Right off the bat, we do see e4. So we can tell that Nepo was at least satisfied with the e4 style position that he got last time, and he was looking to repeat that. And after e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, we do see another Ruy Lopez. But I think what I was expecting and the prediction which I gave as to the opening for game number 3 was that we would not see the exact same knight a5 that we saw from Magnus last time, but instead we would see another e4, e5 position because the opening is so rich that you can play the same e4, e5 position, but deviate down the line and still get a brand new game. And that's exactly what we saw here. Bishop e7, rook e1, and b5, bishop b3, just like the last time we saw this. And knight a5 is looming, but instead of h3, which is what we saw in game number 1 from Nepo, we see a4. And once again, these moves are considered what we call anti-marshals. D5, the marshal, is basically if you play c3, this is the intention. And I mentioned this in my game 1 recap, but the marshal gambit is quite the opening these days. It's got a good reputation for black. And white, generally speaking, is looking to avoid it with moves like h3 or a4 pretty clearly threatens a takes b5 with the pin from the rook on a1. So all these moves just delay black and really prevent him in the short term from playing the move d5 and achieving the marshal. So a4. So basically Nepo says, no, you're not playing the marshal, but instead of h3, where Magnus played knight a5 in game 1, I'm going to play a4, just a different way of avoiding the exact same marshal gambit. So bishop b7, Magnus has certainly been here before. He has some games against Fabiano. Also, many other players have been here before as well. And as we continue with the moves here, the move rook e8 was played by Magnus. And it's certainly not a completely strange move by any stretch. I mean, rook e8 is fairly normal. But there are other moves that are more popular. And I think when I saw this game, what I noticed was that the trend for the match seems to be clear. Both of these players are looking to maybe play popular openings, or at least openings that we've seen before, the Ruy Lopez, for example. But they're not looking to play the most popular lines in those openings. Right? When it comes to match prep, this is exactly what we're seeing here in the World Championship format. These guys are playing main openings, but they're playing sidelines. They don't want to touch the stuff that's been well explored and very well known. They want to explore the sidelines where maybe they're the only people that have analyzed it. And maybe they're the only people that have analyzed it as deep as they've gone. So they want to find an edge anywhere. And oftentimes you'll find that in sidelines. Now you can't play total sidelines in chess because there's a reason that the best openings are played most often because they yield the best chances for an edge, for an advantage, or for equality if you're playing black. But the move rook e8, I mean, instead there's knight d7. There's a lot of other moves. There's knight a5. Very common Ruy Lopez move to play the move c5. But all these moves, let's say knight here, have been definitely seen. c3, knight c5, and these positions, they exist for sure. So Magnus decided to play the move rook e8 and just get off the beaten path just a tiny bit. Knight f1, a very standard Ruy Lopez maneuver for anyone playing this opening. Be very familiar with this. The knight can come to e3, where it targets the f5 and d5 squares. Also, it can go to g3, where it supports the e4 pawn. You might be saying, why would I want to support this pawn? It's already protected. Well, let me introduce you to the concept of overprotection. The reason we overprotect things in chess is so our pieces can move. Now, for example, in the current position, c3 and d4 might be white's plan, but black's plan is going to be bishop f8, and suddenly the e4 pawn might be under attack. So the idea of protecting this pawn 1, 2, and now maybe 3 times, maybe even 4 times with the bishop, is that if 3 pieces are attacking something in your camp and you have 3 things defending, guess what? None of your pieces can move. But as soon as you protect that one thing with an extra piece 4 times, now every single one of your 4 pieces can move because you only need to protect it 3 times. So the concept of overprotection is just so that all your pieces become free to move, and you can choose which one. That gives your position a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility, compared to having all your pieces tied down defending. So knight f1 to g3, overprotecting e4, very standard stuff. c3, d4 for white, pretty normal plan. So black's going to continue as well. h6, bishop f8 to open up the rook. These are pretty standard plans. Bishop d2, bishop f8, and we see knight e3. So Nepo's laying some claim to the center here, especially some squares as well. And knight e7. Now, knight e7 actually has a very similar intent to knight f1, that the knight may want to appear on the g6 square, where it covers f4 and overprotects e5. We just had that discussion. Also, it gets out of the way of the c pawn, so black wants to maybe play c5, gain a lot of space there, and then play d5. So as soon as white saw knight to e7, Nepo said, it's time for c4. I'm not going to let you just establish knight g6 and play c5 because it's a very solid game for black. So c4, which has not been seen in many games, I was looking at how many games featured the move c4, almost none. So once again, Nepo going off the beaten path as well. And the thing about c4 is, they were playing pretty quick up till now. c4 definitely feels like one of those moves where Nepo's indicating he's very much still in his prep, so to speak, because the move c4 looks just a little bit wrong. Like it blocks the bishop, but it does have some intentions, and black has to react. He can't just sit there and this bishop stays blocked forever. There's no b4. If black can play b4 and c5, that's a whole different story. But there's no b4, and something's going to have to be taken here. Taking on a4, then the bishop takes back, hits the rook. The move b4 may follow. And if you take on c4, which was the text move, knight takes back on c4, and the knight returns to c6. Now, the position is clarified. White has played a very unusual c4. So while black was previously intending to just play knight g6, all of a sudden, this knight on c4 might want to go to a5 and hit that bishop. So you can imagine the knight continues his journey, knight a5, and it's quite uncomfortable. This bishop doesn't have any way to stay on this diagonal, and if you just protect it, losing the bishop pair is not ideal either. So we see Magnus play knight c6 back. It might look like a waste of time, but in reality, he was going to do something, the position changed, and now he's adjusting to that. So rook c1, and I think at this point, knight a5, even with the knight covering that square, let me just put a move g6 on the board, was kind of annoying. Takes, the bishop and rook gang up on this pawn, and the bishop's very active here. Let's say we see the move rook c8. Well, this is exactly the kind of thing that could happen in a bad way. The queen forks the king and bishop, picks up an extra pawn thanks to bishop takes f7. This is just an example of how bad it could get after knight a5. So Magnus decides a5, don't want to deal with that at all. Bishop c3 by Nepo, and now Magnus's rather peculiar bishop c8 takes a bishop that was seemingly doing a lot from b7. If white ever plays d4, it's hitting the e4 pawn perfect. But I think Magnus looked at this bishop on b3 and said, no, I don't want to deal with that. Bishop c8 to e6 looks like his plan to oppose that bishop and not have it barreling down on the king. I just indicated and highlighted a line where there was bishop takes f7 and queen to b3. So Magnus, he's dealing with threats like that are just looming in the position. He also wants to oppose the bishop by getting the bishop to e6. So that's why he played bishop to c8. But, still, move bishop to c8 is undeveloping a piece. So the move d4 by white is a great reaction. I mean, this just makes total sense. And I think everyone felt the same way when they saw it, that, when black undevelops a piece, instead of continuing, opening up the middle of the board, especially because this e-pawn is taboo at the moment, because the knight is hanging, bishop's not protecting it anymore. and then the queen comes to d4 and guards it. I mean, this is just great stuff by Nepo. I think no one is going to debate, not even Magnus, that white has a slight advantage here. There's no question. Bishops look great. Queen is well centralized, cannot be attacked either. When you have a queen in the center of the board, you look for your opponent's moves that can attack your queen. If not, you're usually pretty happy. This bishop, knight, and other bishop obviously cannot bother this queen on d4. So I think Nepo has a great slight edge here. However, Magnus is executing his plan to perfection. Bishop to c8 to e6 has been achieved, putting pressure on that bishop on b3. And remember, this pawn on a5, there's always some moves like c5, attacking the queen, and letting the black queen from d8 look at the a5 square. So there's lots of tactical reasons why you can't just pick up this pawn for free. h3. This guy's got good habits. Nepo must have been paying good attention to some habits videos, but no, it's a good time for h3. Black has h6 in the position. White's position looks good. And he decides that, yeah, it's time to play h3. Not going to get back rank mated, prepare for the future. And Magnus decides to play c6, guarding the a-pawn, but also preparing the move we see next. Bishop c2, d5. This is a really important break. If white decides to take this, the knight recaptures, hits the bishop. You start to lose that edge, and your bishop pair is about to get wiped off the table. So the only move to really pursue any type of advantage was the one that Nepo chose. So I think he made a great decision here, but the problem is, h3, bishop c2, they were moves that lost the momentum. And after c6, d5, I saw this and felt that Magnus was completely okay. Right now, e5 is still a great reaction by Nepo, but the problem is d5, if you can't take it, you have to play e5. Look how many pieces, we like to say, get vacuumed off the board here. Takes on c4. There's a queen trade, takes on f6. Now, the pawns are going to be even here. But Magnus comes up with a great move. Instead of taking here, right, and having a position where there's two bishops on the board, bishop can come back here and threaten that pawn. Instead of having this position where the rook's attacked, it's also something he has to react to. Magnus plays the cool bishop to b4. After pawn takes g7, then he decides to trade the bishop and take back on g7. Now, although he has double pawns here, what he does have is he has rook b8 and a rook on d8. So he's going to have two ways to access the second rank, d2 and b2, plus this pawn fixed on a light square. When you have same colored bishops in an endgame, you're looking for where the pawns are fixed. Now, white's happy with this pawn, right? Because that is a light square pawn fixed for black, and these are two light square bishops, which means white can attack that long term. Black has to defend it. But the same thing for white, that is a fixed light square pawn. So white's going to have to defend that, and black can attack it later on in the endgame. So there are some weaknesses for both sides here that the bishops can attack. And black's king is also way more active than white's. It can join the center of the board in just two moves. So all in all, it is approaching equality if it's not there already. The activity from black's two rooks is too much. That, if these rooks are allowed to join here, rook b2, rook a2, all of a sudden you're able to hit all the weaknesses in the position. So Nepo said, look, I can't let these rooks in. If rook d2, there is rook e2 available, which is a decent way of dealing with that. And after rook b8, he decides rook b1. Magnus brings the king in, which is number one thing to do in an endgame. But Nepo's had enough. He trades all the rooks off. And very important here, just the final touch, king to the middle, and then f5 very quickly. Notice that white can't play the move g3 because the pawn on h3 is hanging. So he can't play g3 and get f4 in, which white would love to do. Those are dark square pawns with light square bishops. That's ideal for white. Also, this kicks the king out of the middle of the board. But he's not able to play this move because the pawn's hanging, so he has to play king e2, but then f5, and even if you played g3, f4 would still happen. Black gets his pawn onto a dark square, ideal with these light square bishops, and we see the shuffling, pawn moves up, and the bishop starts targeting this guy, which means white can do nothing. He's stuck defending here. He's got an extra pawn over here, but even if he played g3 after h4, let's say, black doesn't have to do anything. Doesn't have to react. So it's tough to get anything going here. f3 was played, which is pretty much a draw offer, stopping the king from advancing. And, at some point, white could play the move g3, but again, it wouldn't have any effect on the position. Black does not need to react to that. and the players decide to just shuffle the kings instead. So game 3, we saw the same opening at the beginning as game 1 of the World Chess Championship. Nepo decided to deviate, did not play h3, which was his anti-martial selection from game 1. Instead, he decided to play a4 in game number 3. Magnus went for a pretty interesting but offbeat reaction, and the position actually liquidated very quickly. So we saw one of our quickest draws of the World Championship so far. 3 games have passed, draws in all of them, and I will see you guys for the game 4 recap, which is coming up after the rest day. See you guys then.